We could not have asked for a better NLDS. Mets Phillies, here's your crossover to get you ready for the series of the second round.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Mets, Phillies, it doesn't get better than this. For the first time ever in the playoffs, these two teams meet up, and what a year to do it. I'm Ryan Finkelstein, the host of Locked On Mets. I got Connor Thomas, the host of Locked On Phillies. As we meet here, we try to be civil before mayhem that'll begin on Saturday. Connor, I want to lead off with your perspective of what you watched really the whole week. Mets versus Braves, then this wild card round. As a Phillies fan that had to just sit back and watch for a couple days, what can you say about the baseball that we saw unfold this week?
Dude, it's incredible. October started early for you guys with the doubleheader to find your way in, and then the way the wild card series played out. 3 games, the only series that went 3 games, so we got some bonus baseball, which may help the Phillies or it may give the Mets even more momentum. But if you're a Phillies fan and you saw what the Mets were able to do, not just in the doubleheader, but in the wild card series against a really good team in the Brewers, there should be a little bit of nervousness about the magic this team has. I've seen a lot of people comparing them to the 2022 Phillies, and it's just like, you know how all Phillies fans feel about the Mets, but if you're a true baseball fan, it's hard not to appreciate how awesome some of the games you guys have been involved in so far this week have been.
Yeah, I feel like if I was in your shoes, I don't think I'd be rooting for the Mets in that game 3. But at the same time, I think I'd be kind of nervously excited because this is the matchup that in a lot of ways we all want to see. I mean,
right.
The Brewers are a great team, and we just saw that for sure. But Phillies Brewers doesn't quite have the same appeal as Phillies Mets. So I think we're getting what, for one, Major League Baseball definitely wanted here. It's going to be a lot of fun to see these two teams square off because they just played a ton at the end of the season anyway.
Yeah, it's going to be great. And honestly, it's crazy that, and I know the whole playoff structure back in the day used to be 1 team per division makes it. So it kind of makes sense that the Mets and Phillies haven't matched up in the postseason, but it's kind of nuts, especially for people our age, to say, how have these teams not seen each other in the postseason before? It'll take it to another level, which I don't even know how that's possible with the rivalry that we have between these two teams. It's going to be absolute cinema for baseball watchers and fans, and we're going to be in hell for the next couple of days, sweating it out, but it's going to be awesome.
I think for fans of our age, like the time that these two teams would have intersected would have been the mid to late 2000s, where it was the David Wright, Jose Reyes Mets, and the Utley, Ryan Howard, Jimmy Rollins Phillies, those teams. But there wasn't enough wildcard teams for them to go head to head. I think the reason why these teams haven't met is because it's not often they're both good at the same time. It's like one or the other. Well, the Braves are always good. This now turns into what I think is the ultimate rest versus momentum showdown here because the Phillies, as you mentioned, the 2022 team, have been at the forefront of riding that momentum from the wild card round as a springboard to knock off what had been a better team in the regular season, a team that had been sitting on the bye. And there have been a lot of talk about this matchup potentially happening Phillies-Braves because of Brian Snitker's comments before the season that got the Phillies a little bit up in arms because it sort of felt like he was taking a shot, like the format is why the Braves lost those 2 times. Now the Phillies get a chance to show that, hey, the best team's going to win this series. What do you think about the difference now sitting in the seat of having rest? You're pitching ready to go, but you've been waiting back for 5 days. And the Mets, they could not be riding more momentum. They shoot out of a cannon after Pete Alonso's home run to now really be riding this high going into Philadelphia.
Yeah, let's take the illogical side first of this argument because there is this magic factor. And it's not just the Grimace Mets or the OMG Mets, but the 6th seed in the National League has gone to the World Series each of the past 2 years. So the expanded playoffs have seen the Phillies in the 6th seed and the Diamondbacks last year in the 6th seed find their way. So there's this magic surrounding just the seeding alone. That's kind of the scary part of baseball's weird and these magical stories happen. That is kind of the argument. But when you get down to the logical side of it, the rest versus rust is a really, really poignant conversation to have when you see what's happened to the Dodgers the past couple of years, the Braves the past couple of years. And then on the American League side, you've had the Astros in past couple seasons where they've gone to the World Series in the ALCS with that first round bye. So it can be done. The Phillies have done everything they can. They've had inter-squad games this week. They've said the intensity has been high. They've been getting guys work on the mound that didn't get into those games. So they've done everything you really can. But we know that the intensity of an empty intra-squad game at Citizens Bank Park where there's no fans, it doesn't quite equal you playing a doubleheader to get in and then 3 wildcard games on the road in Milwaukee, one that comes down to a comeback home run from Pete Alonso last night. So the intensity level of these two teams is different. Rest is good in that the Phillies are going to be mentally focused on this and their bodies are probably going to feel great, but have they seen enough competitive pitching over the past week with the whole track simulator that they use? It's hard to say, and we're not going to know until tomorrow.
I think this is what makes game one so important, particularly for the Mets to ride that momentum, right? Like, if you're thinking about a Mets team that has shown the ability to come back in games, obviously they can come back in a series, but it feels like you got to capitalize off of what just happened, similar to how they, had that dramatic victory to beat the Braves, and then they win game one of the wild card series before losing game two, and then getting very close to losing game three. Getting that first game, I think, is very imperative to the Mets. I think the Phillies could shake off the rust in the first game, win a game two, take one of the two at Citi Field, come back home and win in the game five. I think for the Mets, they really had to capitalize and take this first game to keep that momentum rolling.
100%. And the Phillies, funny enough, have built the blueprint for how to take down a division-winning team in a series like this because they've done it to the Braves 2 years in a row. And the catalyst for those performances have been going down to Atlanta, taking game one, and then who cares about game two? We flip the series completely on its head. So game one is paramount for both teams because the Phils don't want to fall into that trap that they put Atlanta in. And the Mets, they would love to steal game one, especially with Zach Wheeler on the mound. If you guys beat Wheeler, I don't think that there will be a single confident Philadelphia Phillies fan in the city or the surrounding area or the world, wherever you're watching from. If you beat Wheeler, who has been unbelievable in game ones in the postseason, that changes the whole dynamic of the series and it puts momentum fully on the Mets side. So yes, tomorrow, it cannot be overstated how big of a game it is.
And the last time we saw Zach Wheeler pitch against the Mets won with Tyler McGill as a starting pitcher. We're going to talk about pitching matchups next because we got a pretty big news drop today from Carlos Mendoza. Kodai Senga is going to start against Zach Wheeler game one. How many pitches will he be able to go? What's that going to look like? I'll break it all down for you with Connor in just a minute. First, though, quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. NFL fans, you can now start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Again, you follow the games over at FanDuel, live play-by-play, so much more. If you want to follow MLB games, maybe you want to look some live stuff with the Mets, Phillies, you can do that. And again, you're going to get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place that first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. Stay up to date with all the latest in the world of sports when you check out Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube. If you're watching on the Locked On Mets YouTube channel, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. If you're watching the Locked On Phillies YouTube channel, do Connor a favor and hit subscribe there. Let's talk about the pitching matchups because we got the big news today. Kodai Senga is back. Now, for Phillies fans who might have been following Senga's season, he got hurt in spring training. I believe it was a shoulder injury first. Took him until, July to get back, faced the Braves, struck out 9, and I want to say his first 5 innings pitched. In the 6th inning, he's getting out of the way of a pop-up, and he strains his calf. He's been out with that for a while. He was throwing from a seated position to keep his arm going. Got a AAA start final week of the season to see what he would be like. Had some triceps soreness or something along those lines. His arm got a little sore, so again, we were like, is Senga going to come back? He threw a bullpen or live BP on Monday. I believe it was reported it was 25 pitches. Now they're saying it's good to go. Kodai Senga was very coy with the media. They asked him how many pitches he'd be available. He wouldn't tell them. They kept on pressing. He said, if they tell me to throw 10, I'll throw 10. If they tell me to throw 200, I'll throw 200. So the Mets are definitely trying to keep it, behind the scenes a little bit about how many pitches he can go. If I had to guess, I would say probably about 40 pitches. I think it's trying to get through this lineup one time through, if possible, one time through, and maybe the top of the lineup. But I imagine this is more of an opener situation for Kodai Senga. Still a big edge for the Mets to be able to go through that Phillies lineup the first time through before handing the ball to a David Peterson or a Tyler McGill.
Yeah, 100%. You guys got in kind of a sticky situation by throwing David Peterson last night to close out the game against the Brewers. And that looked to be an advantage for the Phillies because we were discussing this on the radio today, my day job, and we were saying, hey, do they go with Tyler McGill? Do they throw Severino on super short rest? What exactly do they do? Do they throw Peterson after closing the last game? Does he start the next game? And none of them seemed like really viable options. And you don't want to go bullpen game in game one, but if you have an opener and a guy the quality of Kodai Senga, who's had success against the Phillies in his time in New York, that changes things. Now you have to think about the old ghost forkball and the strikeout capability, which has been the Phillies' kryptonite this year when they face pitchers with great strikeout stuff. And it gives the Mets this added boost that where you were looking at it as how does their rotation slot in for potentially 5 games against the Phillies? This gives you something. And not to give too many props to the Mets in the way that this could work out positively, because obviously I want the Phillies to win. But Ranger Suarez in game 1 against the Braves in the NLDS last year, Rob Thompson pulled him after 3 innings, and he was throwing awesome. But the thought process was we trust our bullpen, we have a strategy, and the Phillies ended up shutting out the Braves, an unbelievable offense last year. So it can be done, getting through 2 or 3 innings and then working through a bullpen game. It's obviously not the most ideal thing, but it puts you in a situation where you have another arm that you trust that has had success against his team. And if you're the Phillies, you say, man, he couldn't have sat for another week. He couldn't have hung out and not pitched this series and maybe waited. But that's something that changes the dynamic of at least game 1, if not the series, if he's able to throw later as well.
Yeah, I think if I had to guess how the Mets are going to play it, I do think David Peterson's going to follow up Kodai Senga. How many innings and pitching he has to throw, I really don't know. You could say, all right, well, maybe that throwing that he did to close out that game was the same amount that he would have thrown in between starts, but it was also high leverage closing out a playoff series. So if I had to guess the roadmap for the Mets, it's probably use Kodai Senga and David Peterson to try to get through like 6 innings and then turn it over to your bullpen. I think if there's a real Achilles heel for the Mets in this series, it is the bullpen. But what this sets up for this team, I think, is leaning into their strength, which is their starting pitching, because now you have game 1, which is Senga, Peterson, McGill, kind of a kitchen sink game. Game 2, it's Luis Severino. Game 3, it's Sean Manaea. Game 4, maybe it's Quintana. And then you turn it back around. Really, games 4 and 5 can sort of be all hands on deck. Right. This levels the playing field to me a little bit to have Senga part of this because the Mets bullpen is definitely a big area of concern outside of Edwin Diaz and at times a Jose Butto, maybe a Ryan Stanek. They don't have a lot of arms to turn to. The Phillies, on the other hand, seem to have a much deeper bullpen.
Yeah, they are a complete team as much as any team in baseball is this year. Not only is the starting pitching exceptional, and we've got a question about who's going to start game 2, which I'll talk about as well, with maybe Christopher Sanchez jumping Aaron Nola. But in the bullpen, you have 5 proven high leverage arms that have been here before. Carlos Estevez, who they acquired at the trade deadline from the Angels, has been awesome in the closer role. Ryan Kerkering, who made a meteoric rise from single A all the way to pitching in the NLCS last year, has been outstanding this year. You have the 2 All-Stars, Jeff Hoffman and Matt Strahm, and then you round that out with Jose Alvarado, who's had a very up and down season, but we know he gets fired up for Mets games, and he's also got incredible stuff when he's on. So those 5 guys can get you through a lot, and then you have Jose Ruiz and Tanner Banks, who have been not so much mop-up guys, but they've been in the lower leverage innings and have really excelled in those roles. So the Phillies bullpen is a strength. The starting pitching is a strength. Anything the Mets can do to leverage that playing field, like you were talking about with getting Senga back and throwing the kitchen sink in some of these games, is going to be necessary because pitching is what wins in October. And you'd be hard-pressed to find a team that on paper looks as set as the Phillies are.
Yeah, for sure. And I think when you sort of look at this series, Zach Wheeler can very much win the series for the Phillies if he takes game 1 and game 5. I mean, that's, I think, the biggest advantage the Phillies have. The Mets are trying to make it a little more even by being able to go to a guy in David Peterson that's had a lot of success, and now Kodai Senga, to try to combine efforts to match a Wheeler. And if you can get to the end of the game, get Wheeler out, it's close. You never know what can happen. So I think that's sort of how game 1 and game 5 are going to play out. I am curious about the middle. I saw today, it sounds like Christopher Sanchez will pitch that home game 2, setting up Nola to pitch, opening up the Citi Field part of this series. Let's look at those matchups for a second. Game 2, Christopher Sanchez versus Luis Severino. Game 3, Sean Manaea versus Aaron Nola. I think based on the seasons they had, maybe you give the Phillies an edge, but I really think any of those 4 starters can turn in a great effort.
Yeah, 100%. And the thing that you have when you look at Severino and Manaea are they're more proven pitchers both than Christopher Sanchez. He's a young guy. He's got 1 career playoff inning, and it was in the NLCS against the Diamondbacks in a start, and they pulled him immediately. Not that he was throwing poorly, but they didn't really trust him. And he's been rough on the road, which is why he's probably going to get the ball in game 2. He's a totally different pitcher at Citizens Bank Park, and he put together a great season. But we know that the postseason is a different animal. There's this guy in LA that's been pitching out there for well over a decade, and Clayton Kershaw that's had amazing 162 game regular seasons. Then he gets in the postseason and it's different. And that's for an all-time great. So they want to put him in the most controllable environment possible. What I will say is, if you're in a situation where the Phils drop game 1, there's no guarantee that Rob Thompson won't say, hey, we can't afford to go down 2-0. And Aaron Nola can be a bit of a powder keg at points. He can be really good, or he could give up 3 home runs at the start and give up 6 runs. Maybe they throw Nola at home, try and get more of a guaranteed win in a spot at Citizens Bank Park where the Phillies have been really good and flip that. But if all things stay equal and go to plan, it should be Sanchez in game 2 to take advantage of his really good home splits as opposed to away.
Yeah, it seems like from the outside looking in, for Sanchez, a big part of his success is keeping the ball in the yard. Mm-hmm. Do you think any part of this is looking at the last time Nola faced the Mets at Citizens Bank, where they hit some home runs and really got on him, where maybe they even kind of like the idea of Nola getting a pitch at Citi Field, a little bit bigger outfield for him, to maybe keep the ball in the yard and, kind of playing again to Sanchez's strengths?
Yeah, it might be. I think more of the deal, Rob Thompson talked earlier in the week of how Aaron Nola could pitch on the moon. It doesn't matter. Like, he's comfortable and calm in any situation. The guy never really shows emotion. And he's been around the block for a time or two. He's had deep postseason runs and numerous postseason starts. So he's a more cool, not that Christopher Sanchez isn't, but he's a cool, collected veteran who, if you told him he was pitching game 1 or game 5 or any game in between, he'd say, okay, and he'd take the ball and he'd go out there. So it's the trust in the demeanor of the player and the having been a big-time pitcher at the major league level for years now that makes them really comfortable with Aaron Nola throwing at Citi Field. And I'm sure the size of the field doesn't hurt. Christopher Sanchez has been a guy who's kept the ball in the yard a lot wherever he's pitched. So it could be. It's more, to me, and I think from what Rob Thompson said, the demeanor of the pitchers.
Okay, so that makes a lot of sense how they're thinking the first 3 games here. The crazy thing is the guy with one of the best playoff track records could get the ball in game 4. If we do get to a game 4 and it turns into a battle of lefties, Ranger Suarez and Jose Quintana, who just turned in an unbelievable start against the Brewers, although I'm sure Mets fans would still be pretty nervous about that game if it was an elimination game for the Mets. How do you feel about Suarez? Are you looking at the season that he had, which was a fantastic start, and then he really tailed off? Are you concerned about that, or you just think it's playoff Ranger and all is going to be fixed just when the lights turn on?
So I'm not overly concerned, and I think I'm the only person in Philadelphia who's not overly concerned. People are freaking out about Ranger Suarez because the velocity is down. He can't really find his stuff right now, and he's had injuries throughout the second half of the season. The way I see it is, would I be surprised if Ranger Suarez goes out and throws 6 shutout innings because of the pitcher he was for the first half of the season? It wouldn't shock me. I'm not expecting it because he hasn't been that guy in the second half, but the makeup of the guy, we talk about cool, calm, collected with Aaron Nola. Ranger Suarez is more so. And he has the stuff when he's on. It's just a coin flip at this point. And in the postseason, you don't want to really rely on coin flips. I would expect the Phillies to look at him as more of a 3 or 4 inning start and then go to the bullpen, much like they did last year, try and survive a time and a half through the lineup with Ranger Suarez. So I wouldn't be expecting a long start from him where he takes over a game. I don't think he's incapable of it, but the faith in him because of the velocity dip and the stuff not really working. He said after his last start, I just didn't have a feel for anything. It's a scary place to be, and I'm trusting the track record, but that could easily burn me, and a lot of people are nervous about it.
I think that game, you mentioned it's a coin flip on Suarez. I think it's kind of a coin flip on Quintana. He has been unbelievable since September started. And like I said, just came off a great start. The Mets took a chance to go into the sixth with them, and it all worked out great. You could see a situation where that's flipped, right? Where they decide, all right, Rangers out. We're going to try to keep Quintana in, make that our advantage. And in the fifth or the sixth inning, maybe that's when Quintana, hangs a couple pitches, and all of a sudden it's a new ball game. I think what's going to be interesting going into potential game 5, if that is the situation in game 4 that we get to, if you look at those two guys, that whatever team has their back against the wall is going to be more aggressive with the hook. And
Right.
I think that's why it's so important for the Mets to get 2 of the first 3, if possible, basically win game 1 in each ballpark, because if the Mets end up in that situation where their back's against the wall and they have to exhaust everything in game 4 just to get to a game 5, well, now you're staring at Zach Wheeler, and who are you throwing opposite him? If you needed Peterson, you needed McGill. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see what happens in Philly, and then how these two teams set up for that game 4, which could be the real swing of the series.
Yeah, it's a chess match, man, and it's a war of attrition as well, and that's what playoff baseball is. It's why it was great to see the Mets go 3 games with the Brewers rather than somebody winning that series in 2. But it also relies heavily on the manager making the proper decisions, managing a bullpen. We know how volatile those decisions can be. You can make the right call a million times, and the guy makes the wrong pitch, and the next thing you know, you're the GOAT of the series. And I'm not talking greatest of all time. So that's the tough thing about playoff baseball. The margins are so thin, the pitching matchups are so important, and the decisions are magnified every game. And these are two teams that are going to be put to the test playing really, really hard-nosed, tough baseball over the next couple of days.
It's going to be so much fun, and that's going to set up, an NLCS where there's another good series on the other side that could produce some crazy results. I think the National League really has the more exciting road here to the World Series if you look at the teams that are left, and this series is definitely atop the list. I want to talk about these lineups in just a minute. Who's got the better group going into this series? We'll go through it first, though. Another quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. And if you're a Mets fan, try to go to Game Time and buy a ticket from a Phillies fan. Get into this series if you can, these first couple of games. And you have the Game Time Picks, which is their feature that'll filter out the fluff and show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. I know when I go to a game, I got the Game Time Picks help me out, and I don't even buy my tickets until I'm walking into the stadium, because Game Time is the best place to go for last-minute tickets. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. All right, so who has the better lineup, the Mets or the Phillies? Connor, do me a favor. Run me through what you think the lineups are going to be for the Phillies. Is there any platoon situations we got going on? Obviously, the Phillies have a great top of the lineup, but can you just kind of run through 1 through 9 what the Phillies are probably going to run out there?
Absolutely. It's going to be Schwarber leading off, Turner batting second, Harper batting third. Rob Thompson's had that penciled in all year. Cleanup is either going to be Nick Castellanos or Alec Boehm. I'd imagine it'll be Boehm because he's had the better overall season starting at third base in the All-Star game. Then Castellanos will bat fifth. You'll probably have Bryson Stott in the 6th hole just as a lefty to break up righties, with JT Realmuto batting 7th. And then 8th and 9th is where it gets interesting. It could be a platoon situation in left field with Brandon Marsh and Austin Hayes. Austin Hayes had a kidney infection that kept him out for a lot of the final 3 weeks of the season. He played, I believe, 3 games before the season ended, and I don't know if that's enough time for him to be ready, but Brandon Marsh had a rough second half swinging the bat. So those guys will probably platoon in left field. I imagine Yohan Rojas will bat 9th, playing in center field.
Yeah, so I look at that lineup, and I think the top of the lineup is where the Phillies have an edge. You compare that to the Mets, they're running out there with Lindor, Vientos, Nimmo, Alonso. Now, if Pete Alonso takes this home run and turns back to the Pete Alonso we've seen in prior years, I think that completely changes this series. I honestly look at him as the biggest X factor for the Mets. Lindor is going to give you great at-bats. There's no doubt about that. But Pete Alonso has not been giving us great at-bats. When you're watching these games as a Mets fan, you're frustrated. Now he has this moment. Maybe that gets a lot of the pressure off him, and he can actually come through and be a big piece. I think that'll level the playing field, where I look at the Mets and say they might have an edge in this series, or at least offensively is the depth of this team. When you get further down the line, you get to Jose Iglesias, who just, I guess he's a 330 hitter now. Doesn't make sense, but that's what he continues to do. Starling Marte has looked really good in the playoffs so far, looking like the old version of himself. JD Martinez isn't even playing every day. He's now in a pseudo platoon with Jesse Winker at the DH spot, but more playoff experience than pretty much anybody in this series. And then you get the outfield. Tyrone Taylor's been giving the Mets great at-bats. He's going to be their starting center fielder. On the bench, you got guys like Harrison Beta that has some playoff experience, hasn't been swinging it too well. Luis Angel Acuna is their sort of speedster util guy. I think the Mets have an edge when it just comes to overall depth. Alvarez also can change a game. So I think the Mets have maybe a little bit of an edge on overall depth of the position players. I think the Phillies have maybe more top-end talent.
Yeah, for sure. And it's funny, some of those guys that make you feel like the Phillies don't have enough depth, and the Phils have added to that. It's not Jake Cave like it was last year. I hate to rip the ricochet shot at him. Hope he's doing well out in Colorado. But you look at guys like Edmundo Sosa, who has had some really big at-bats in the postseason for him. Austin Hayes, if he does come off the bench while Brandon Marsh starts, or vice versa, those are guys that can be plus hitters. And Brandon Marsh had an amazing NLCS last year. He was about the only Philly that hit. Bryson Stott, we've had conversations in past years. Could he be a guy that contends with Luis Arraez for a batting title at some point in his career? You have upside with some of those guys. Johan Rojas, over 120-some games last year, hit 300 at the major league level. So they have upside. The consistency is the question. And there is a point where the bottom three guys in the Phillies lineups have been automatic outs. And you can't have that in the postseason. So the consistency of the Mets lineup when you get deeper is definitely something that could give you an edge. The Phillies don't not have upside. There are just question marks down there at the end. We know where the Phillies are going to go, though. It's going to go where the top three guys are. Kyle Schwarber, Trey Turner, Bryce Harper will be the deciding factors in this series, because those are all three guys with postseason resumes that say if they can turn it on like they have in the past, they should beat anybody. Like, no one in baseball can contend. I'll take them over the Judge Soto duo simply because there's three of them. I'll take them over the Dodgers simply because Ohtani's been amazing and the other guys have been hurt. But on paper, everything looks great. If you have an NLCS situation like last year where those guys go quiet, the rest of the lineup, they're not strong enough to carry this team. So the big money guys got to be the big money guys. And I mean, I'm sure it's the same with Lindor leading the way, Alonso, the guys you have at the top for the Mets.
Yeah, I think that's a very bold take that you would take your three over the Dodgers trio.
Right?
Like,
I got to believe in my guys.
Yeah, I can't just like let that statement just go unanswered, because
let's go through it.
I mean, I tell you what, here's the thing about baseball. In any given series, when you need to have the guys that have the ability to rise to that level. I think both of these teams have that. I think if you run it through a simulation 100 times, the Betts, Ohtani, Freeman trio is probably going to come out. Granted, I know Freddie is dealing with an injury right now, so
yeah,
I guess that could bring it back down a little bit. But comparing Mets Phillies here, I think with the Mets, we've seen a lot lately where it is the bottom of the lineup that has sort of picked it up for the top of the lineup, and at times even set the stage for Lindor to get those RBI opportunities from the leadoff spot. But yeah, ultimately it's going to come down to your guys. And I've been saying that on this show for a while now when it comes to the Mets. So many shows where I've been talking about how this team's not going to get where they need to go until Brandon Nimmo and Pete Alonso take ownership and start coming through. Nimmo, that's been going on for the last couple of weeks. Alonso just had his moment. That is going to be the big thing in this series. Which of these teams has their superstars really show up in a big way? Who's the guy out of this group? Is it Harper or Lindor that hits 400 with 3 home runs? Like which of these guys is going to step up? And good pitching can neutralize them. So this is going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, and really quick, because we know what Bryce Harper is. Like, the guy is a monster. I just read a great feature by Jeff Passan on ESPN that's free for people to check out on Bryce Harper and the growth into this superstar. In the postseason, he's been one of, if not the best players over the past 2 years. But Lindor has been amazing this year. And he does not get the credit he deserves because of the season Shohei Ohtani put together. But how dangerous do you see him in this series? Is he a Bryce Harper level impact player on the postseason stage in your mind?
Absolutely. I mean, look, Pete Alonso doesn't get up if not for the at-bat that Francisco Lindor had against Devin Williams before that to draw the walk. And I mean, for what he has done this year, it's so MVP worthy. And I think if we really boiled down the definition of most valuable player, and it wasn't just stats based. I mean, I was making the case that Lindor should have been the MVP over Ohtani heading into September. I didn't expect Ohtani to hit 400 with 1,000,000 home runs and 1,000,000 stolen bases, just
Right.
ending the conversation. And now I can't even look into a camera and say Lindor deserves it over Ohtani. Ohtani had the season, but Francisco Lindor has been every definition of an MVP. And the home run that he hit against the Braves was so ridiculously clutch, where your team has this emotional swing of 6-run rally to grab the lead, to 4-run meltdown by your bullpen, to think that you're on the edge of losing and having to go into that game 2. They probably would have won it anyway, but I think if the Mets had backed in, they probably wouldn't have beaten the Brewers. They needed the momentum to carry over. Lindor delivered that moment. And even at the end of the last game, the thing about Francisco Lindor is it's two-sided. It's also his defense. He lets a low line drive drop instead of catching it so he can turn to and takes it himself to end the game. Francisco Lindor is absolutely a difference maker. And I would say going into this series, the fact that he has gotten back to being himself with this back injury, that's the only reason why they're here. And that's the reason why they will beat the Phillies if they do. It's because Francisco Lindor is going to continue the narrative of his season, which is the fact that he's been the best player for the Mets. And you know what? If they go through the Phillies and then they go through the Dodgers, we might look back at the end of this year and say, you know what? This was Francisco Lindor's year where he was the best player in baseball.
It'll be incredible, man. And that's just another thing that sets the stage. It should be a great series. I don't think either of us hope it goes 5 because we'll have gray hair by the end of it. But everyone else around baseball is probably hoping it does. It's going to be awesome.
Yeah, I think we're both hoping for a hard-fought 4-game series win by our team, where our team doesn't face elimination because those games are scary. And I think that the one thing that I'll say to kind of close here, I hate the Phillies and the Braves, but I don't think I hate them equally because I feel like the Mets and the Phillies, while we don't love each other, I think you can look in the mirror and they're very similar fan bases that are just really passionate and have gone through a lot of the similar ups and downs. So look at us. Here we are. NLDS. It should be fun.
Who would have thought? Should be a good time.
All right, man. Well, maybe we will check in at certain points throughout this series, but I'm glad we got a nice series preview for both of our audiences here. If you are on the Locked On Mets side, make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe on YouTube. On the Phillies side, same thing for Connor. And we will see what happens. Mets versus Phillies, game 1, I think 4 o'clock. Wheeler versus Senga. It's going to be a blast.